I've always been told never to begin a presentation with an apology, but I have to do just that today. In preparing for today, I decided to send details of what I was going to talk about to one of my Italian colleagues, just to make sure that I wasn't going to say anything that didn't translate easily culturally. Somewhat to my surprise, she said that Italians are actually much more conservative than you think. And I should be very cautious about talking about subjects like sex and homosexuality. I said, but I'm talking about celebrity endorsement. I have nothing to say, you know. So if I'm going to offend anyone, then please accept my apology for my very direct Scottish approach. Everyone in the room has a good idea of why they want to use celebrities, but we're all aware that celebrities are only human, and all of them are capable of making mistakes. As James has been explaining, celebrity endorsement really does work, so we're never going to escape the celebrity. But if you're thinking about having a contract with a celebrity, you need to be prepared. Some celebrity relationships cost more than a company acquisition, and yet often brands do little or no research into the celebrity's background. Of course, in some cases, it's the celebrity's faults which make them the perfect choice. Who would have thought that a genocidal dictator would appear in an advert? But this one was for, this one was for war bonds, to pay to fight him. I've only just been advising on the creation of a fund to produce merchandise for damaged celebrities. The people behind it taking the view that, at least in the United States, there is a group of consumers who do connect with the casualties of the celebrity world. Mike Tyson might be a convicted rapist, but there are people out there prepared to overlook that, and now he's reformed, focus instead on his more positive attributes. So let's look at some examples of where celebrities were possibly ill-chosen. Would Camel really have chosen Rock Hudson to endorse the pure pleasure of their product if they'd known that he was a very active homosexual? Back in the late 1950s when this advert appeared? Almost certainly not. In 1988, Michelob made an ad featuring Eric Clapton playing one of his hits in a moody and atmospheric bar setting with plenty of shots of their product. Just after the ad was aired, Rolling Stone reported that Clapton had checked into rehab for alcoholism. He was a rock star. It wouldn't have taken too much digging to find out he had a drink problem. In 2008, Eva Mendes announced she was going into rehab for drug abuse problems the very day that Calvin Klein announced her as the new face of its fragrance. Did no one do any checking? Let's face it, if you're a brand which wants to use a 33-year-old sports star in your campaigns, you need to be pretty realistic about your expectations about what they might get up to. It's interesting in hindsight looking at this Accenture ad. You'll say it says, "We know what it takes to be a tiger." They had no idea, but they were going to find out. Now, the thing about Tiger was that prior to the story breaking, I looked at him and I thought, really boring. A great golfer perhaps, but really dull. There were none of the obvious signs of there being a more interesting story in the background, unlike with some other high-profile personalities. Still, it was excusable for me not to know about Tiger's liking for cocktail waitresses. I wasn't paying him millions of dollars to promote my brand. But apparently it wouldn't have been difficult if you talked to a few golfers to find out about his marital infidelity. This was something that Accenture had the wherewithal to do in-house. They have a risk management division, but appeared they didn't bother. Now, this works for celebrities too. I have another apology to make here to Todd's for this example, but it's important. Shortly after this ad appeared with Sienna Miller for Todd's, the World Wildlife Fund issued its Deeper Luxury report, ranking Todd's bottom of a list of luxury brands for its environmental and social performance. Sienna had just been given an award by the Environmental Media Association for her efforts in promoting the dangers of global warming, so this was a bit of an issue for her. Todd quickly addressed many of the concerns raised in the report, but it was still embarrassing for everyone involved. So, celebrities are doing due diligence on brands now, particularly on their environmental and work practices. Be prepared and follow their guide. Now, even before we begin to think about addressing things that might go wrong, I'd recommend that everybody think very carefully about the subjects that the contract covers. Very often, lawyers simply use their old precedents without really thinking about whether they're appropriate for the circumstances. If one looks at the celebrity endorsement relationships which have been successful, like the one between Cate Blanchett and Giorgio Armani, there's no reason why aspects of that relationship can't be written into the contract. It means that both parties have to think about things, and there are likely to be fewer surprises later on. Most celebrities, as James said, now have some form of interaction with social media. Write it into your contract. Think about how you might want to use them in that format, and if you don't have enough experience of it, find someone who has. Properly used, social media is the way forward in the celebrity sector. It's particularly important because it's likely that you'll be negotiating with the celebrity's agent. In this case, super agent Brian Lord. Agents have a job to do, and their job is to say no, or that'll cost more. Particularly if you ask the question after the deal is signed. It's my experience in advising celebrities that agents are less likely to allow their celebrities to do things than the celebrities are willing to do themselves. So, create opportunities for the celebrity to develop a relationship with the brand and keep them informed of the relevant issues and products affecting that brand, just as James said before. So, assuming you're satisfied that there are no skeletons in the closet, and you enter into a contract with celebrities, where can things go wrong? Your celebrity might breach the contract. Raymond Weil recruited Charlize Theron as its face, and she signed an exclusive agreement to the brand to wear only its watches. Subsequently, she was photographed wearing Dior, a Dior watch, and Raymond Weil sued her. Now, I know quite a lot about this case, not because I was involved in it, but because in suing her, Raymond Weil made its entire case public. Anyone who wanted to could go to court and look at exactly how much Charlize Theron was earning, not just from Raymond Weil, but also from Chopard, which paid her $200,000 to wear its jewels at the Oscars in 2006. Now, I know for certain that the error was an oversight. It wasn't intentional, but it was complicated by the fact that Charlize was also a brand ambassador to Dior. I'd argue that the Raymond Weil advisors may have done their client and the rest of you a disservice by highlighting the paid-to-wear activities of celebrities. And I'd argue that it can be much better for the brand if, instead of trying to use the breach of an agreement to terminate it and ask for your money back, instead use it as a means of getting more from your celebrity. Had Raymond Weil not sued Charlize Theron, it's arguable that the short-term publicity surrounding the breach would have completely blown over, and they might have ended up with even more favourable terms. Instead, the whole thing got much more coverage, and I bet they didn't sell a single additional watch. So, when drafting your celebrity endorsement agreement, give yourself some options, in addition to simple termination and repayment of the fee. Now, during the relationship, we're going to see him a lot. Encourage your own staff to think ahead about all communications and slogans associated with celebrity. If they're planning to use a slogan, think about how it might be interpreted. This is Gatorade. It's a sports drink which had an endorsement deal with Tiger Woods. In hindsight, given the circumstances behind his downfall. Was this a good slogan? It's the one they used. So, what do you do when disaster strikes? Every endorsement contract should have a morals clause, which allows you to terminate if the celebrity does something which they shouldn't. But remember, by the time a story hits, the likelihood is that you will have spent possibly millions of euros shooting a campaign, booking advertising space, and so terminating that agreement really does need to be the final option. If we look at the example of the brands which were connected with Kate Moss when the story broke about her alleged cocaine use, a number of them dropped her, but ironically those which didn't came out of the whole issue looking cooler for it. This isn't always the case, but it's also interesting to look at what happened when Kellogg's dropped Michael Phelps when he was photographed smoking cannabis. Cannabis smokers immediately called for a boycott of Kellogg's. And a report by Ivano, which is a company reputation index, showed that the brand went from number 9 out of 5,600 brands covered by the index to number 83 when they booted Phelps out. They'd become less cool. So, have the right to terminate, but think about alternatives. Inserting a requirement for the celebrities to work with you to minimize any damage from their actions can be much more helpful. Now, in Kate's case, on the whole, she handled the circumstances with some dignity and a lot of discretion. It also helped that within the industry, she was well liked. Also, she'd never set herself up as being the face of polite society or healthy living. She represented Cool Britannia, and frankly, all of us expected that to involve something a little bit illicit sometimes. Phelps was a different case because he was a world-class athlete. People expected him to view his body as a temple. Although given he was promoting Frosties and Subway sandwiches, maybe that was a mistake. But even then, his actions didn't appear that outrageous to most of the people he'd been hired to appeal to. Now, Subway did something very interesting. The guy on your left is a guy called Jared Fogle. He managed to lose about 60 kilos on a diet that consisted only of Subway sandwiches. And he became a celebrity in his own right. He was the Subway guy. Around about the time that Phelps was photographed with his cannabis, Subway noticed that Jared had begun to put a bit of weight on again. So Phelps's punishment was he had to train Jared in public. It worked. It was a great story. The whole of America got it. It was a perfect example of doing something positive. Tiger Woods, on the other hand, is a different issue. There we had someone who was really living a lie. Now, cynics might say that anyone who's prepared to pay a world-class sportsman who travels the world to tournaments, millions and millions of dollars to promote their brand, has to be unbelievably naive not to expect that there's going to be some indiscretion along the way. And arguably, if you're a brand like Gillette, which is after all the best a man can get, you're going to be appealing to a demographic where they're not going to be that upset if Tiger really lives up to his name. Now, Gatorade probably didn't benefit from the activities that led to it being renamed Fornicatorade on the web, but arguably Gillette and Nike might have. What the whole affair showed, though, was that nobody done any digging. Not many people in his industry actually liked him very much, and his handlers were so unbelievably arrogant that they missed every opportunity to limit the damage. Now, this is probably partly down to the fact that he was such a huge star. If a sponsor wasn't prepared to sign him up on his terms, then there was another one waiting in the wings to do so. Consequently, even though those sponsors were paying huge sums for their relationship, they had little control over, or even involvement in, the crisis management which followed on from his car crash. There are a few actions which a person can take which makes them unredeemable in the eyes of the consumer. Look at Mike Tyson. And it's going to be interesting to see how the rehabilitation of John Galliano is managed. In Galliano's case, the fact he was drunk was never going to be an issue. Even a public meltdown would have been excusable. After all, Mark Jacobs has been in and out of rehab with the support and understanding of LVMH a number of times. The real issue here was his including one of the last great taboos, invoking the Holocaust. Whether his statements were intended to be anti-Semitic or not doesn't matter. It's how they were interpreted. In reality, they might not have been any more offensive than Sharon Stone's statements were to the Chinese when she criticized their behavior towards Tibet, but she got to keep her role at Dior. So what made the difference? Was it that Dior had recently signed Natalie Portman, a Jewish actress who had until then avoided any brand endorsement and who became very vocal in her criticism of Galliano? What the Galliano story has done is to increase the likelihood that as brands, you'll find your celebrities insisting on a reverse morals clause. And this is to cover the celebrity in the event that the brand or one of its officers behaves in a way that might damage their reputation. Now, the principal issue that brands have to face at the moment is that it's now very difficult to keep something hidden. It's still possible to get court orders preventing the press reporting on something, but it doesn't work on the internet, and certainly not on Twitter. It makes it all the more important for a brand to be able to contractually require an errant celebrity to take positive actions to mitigate the damage they might have done by their behavior. Social media might be an unwelcome source of fuel to a media fire, but it can also be used as a way of changing the perception of a celebrity in crisis. Some celebrities are just incapable of being controlled. Witness the recent antics of Charlie Sheen. Now, for the people in this room, the deliberate use of a damaged celebrity is pretty much off the agenda. What we want to achieve is the maximum amount of positive coverage. So my 5 tips to do that. Number 1, do your research. Hopefully better than Inspector Clouseau. You don't need to know just that you've chosen the right person to represent your brand. You need to know everything about them. Hire a specialist if you need to. If you're contemplating on spending more than 50,000 euros on anyone, it's worth the cost of the research. Think of it as an insurance policy. Engineer a meeting between the celebrity and the brand. As James said, if you act only through the agent, your deal or your relationship is not going to be as good. Have a very clearly thought through strategy with a complete list of activities you want them to participate in. It might push the price up a bit initially, but it's going to be worth it in the end. If the celebrity breaches the contract, don't automatically think about suing them. Threaten it, yes, but have alternatives lined up. And make sure that these are specifically referred to in the contract if possible. If something unexpected happens, by all means threaten termination of the contract, but make sure you've got some alternatives drafted in to give you some choice. Think really carefully before you make a decision. Think about who your customer is. Most people realize that grown-ups have sex, and sometimes that's not going to be the person with the person they're married to, and sometimes it's not even going to be with a person of the opposite sex. You're unlikely to be able to please all of your potential customers by your actions, but perhaps surprisingly, the older, more conservative customer is much more pragmatic than you might think. Most luxury brands now have social responsibility projects. Get your celebrity involved in them at the beginning of the relationship. It makes them look good, and it makes you look good too. It will also, if I'm being cynical, look a lot less obvious if you then need them to step up their philanthropic activity in order to rehabilitate their image. Number 5, finally, look at the possible impact of the story. It might not be as bad as you think. If one was being very cynical about the Galliano story, and I do so as someone married to a Jewish woman, it's only a scandal in the West. Rightly or wrongly, few people in Asia care. And arguably, if I'm very cynical, possibly perversely, Mr. Galliano's sentiments might have driven up sales in the Middle East. Ultimately, LVMH's response was probably the right one. but only because they can't be seen to condone any sort of racism. However, understand you might need a different response for different markets. I'm going to end on a happy note. Celebrity endorsement isn't all about managing risk. There are happy stories too. How much more coverage could a brand want than this? And it was free. Thank you.
Grazie mille,